But first, let's go to that breaking news. Peter Dutton is tonight demanding the government cancel a major pro-Palestinian rally planned for the anniversary of October 7 on Monday. Dutton says the timing is utterly sickening. And we learned just moments ago that New South Wales Police have filed a court motion to try stop this protest going ahead. The Palestinian Action Group is planning to hold a mass gathering on the steps of Town Hall. This is almost a replica of the outrageous protest that started there and ended at the Opera House a year ago. The flyer promoting this event, and you can see it here, it says, "Mourning 12 months of genocide and terrorism, October 7th. You can't get more insensitive than this. On the anniversary of the day, actual terrorists invaded Israel and murdered entire families, killed babies in their cots, and raped teenage girls before shooting them dead. This is the day the Palestinians want to have a rally? Absolutely not. This is not okay. It's not appropriate. Not on the day where there was the greatest loss of Jewish life since the Holocaust." Well, Peter Dutton told the Daily Telegraph that the timing is wrong. He said the fact that these anti-Jewish protest gatherings are being considered and organised at a time when the Jewish community will be commemorating the greatest loss of life since the Holocaust is an utterly sickening and vile reflection on these protesters. How low will they stoop? Those are Peter Dutton's comments. And he says there needs to be an urgent court order to stop the event going ahead. He's called on Albanese to put an end to this, to get the organisers to change the date. And he says the Prime Minister needs to start showing leadership. But I'm starting to think the Prime Minister is incapable of leadership. He might have been a good local MP, but he hasn't been good for Australia. He's allowed our successful multicultural society to crumble. He's allowed racism to spread. He's allowed one community in particular to be targeted over and over again, day in, day out, with the perpetrators facing no consequences at all. The Prime Minister has not only damaged our diplomatic relations with Israel, but he's allowed support for terrorism to flourish. Under his watch, the nature of our country has changed for the worse, where the most vile sentiments in society have been unleashed. There are mosques holding services for a dead terrorist leader, spitting in the face of Australian laws. And Albanese does nothing. But Peter Dutton said today that if he were Prime Minister, he would take action.
Firstly, mosques holding memorial services for the Hezbollah leader. It seems deliberately provocative.
Well, it's very much provocative and it's unnecessary. Every Australian would want somebody with religious belief to be able to practice that belief and go to a mosque, go to a temple, go to a church, whatever it might be. But to go there to glorify somebody who has been responsible for literally hundreds or thousands of deaths, a terrorist leader, a leader of a listed terrorist organisation, is completely unacceptable.
What do you do about it?
The police and the authorities at Home Affairs should be in deep discussions with the imams and with other leaders within the community to make sure that they dial the temperature down here, because this is going to end in tragedy if we don't see an enforcement of the law and people respecting our values and our laws in this country.
Dutton accuses Albanese of weakness for failing to take action ever since the Opera House protest. He's painting him as weak, and the perception is cementing quickly because it's true.
Why, Carl? I mean, why not show the strength of leadership that our nation requires? This is a very significant point for us, and I don't believe any of his predecessors, not Julia Gillard, not John Howard, not Bob Hawke, would have acted with such weakness, and it permeates down.
Now, Albanese doesn't accept the criticism that he's weak, but he should. Compare a strong leader like Netanyahu in Israel, or even Dutton's own courage, with the insipid and uninspiring Albanese. Editor Chris Dorr makes this excellent point in The Nightly. He says, when the US version of October 7 went down, September 11, Australia went to war. Now, he says, we have gone to water. And he says, put simply, the left detests Israel and supports what they believe is the Palestinian resistance, a movement that has long been a front for a murderous anti-West Islamist terror cult. And Dorr writes about how figures of the left, like Penny Wong and Albanese, have simply appeased terrorist supporters. He says Wong is exposed by her own words. She is the minister for yes, but Israel. Albanese might be an ordinary bloke and an average prime minister for which we can generally forgive him, but he will never be forgotten for appeasing terrorists and running an extraordinarily dangerous foreign policy. Now, former Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir once said that Israel would not ask permission to survive. She said, we refuse, absolutely, to be the only people in the world which consents to having its fate decided by others. This wise message is worth remembering as Israel fights for its survival, as the world tries to tie its hands behind its back. The woke, weak West calls constantly for a ceasefire, including the Albanese government. And Israel's response, well, first the execution of Nasrallah, and now a ground-targeted raid to dismantle Hezbollah forces. The terror organisation is crippled, beheaded, and now the IDF is targeting the last remaining weapons and infrastructure. And today, Israel announced limited ground raids of Hezbollah sites across the Lebanon border. The Defence Minister Yoav Gallant met Israeli troops hours before these young men and women put their life on the line for the sake of freedom.
This is your mission. We will employ all that is needed. Your forces, other forces, from the air, from the sea, and also from the land.
Now, it's important to note here that Israel is not only defending its own citizens, but liberating Lebanon from the stranglehold of a murderous regime. Yet the West demanded a ceasefire, and Joe Biden personally phoned Netanyahu to urge him to let Nasrallah be, not to go after him, not to kill him, instead have a ceasefire. How pathetic are these woke and weak world leaders, and the Australian government is among the worst of them.
We are gravely concerned that the escalation of this conflict means the loss of more innocent life, and that's why we have engaged in the international community, and it's why we reiterate our calls for a ceasefire.
The number of civilians killed is just intolerable, and that's why the government's calls for a ceasefire are so important.
Certainly calling for de-escalation of the conflict in the Middle East. So that remains our message. That remains our message to Israel.
In fact, it's the Western leaders that are partly to blame for these emboldened terrorists. Had the international community shown unwavering solidarity with Israel in the wake of October 7, Tehran may not have flexed its muscles and given the green light to Hezbollah and the Houthis. The international community should have shown unequivocal strength in the face of Iran. Instead, the West has perpetuated the false narrative that it's Israel that's the aggressor. And this has only emboldened Iran and its terrorist proxies. The international community could have slapped the strongest sanctions possible on the Ayatollahs of Iran and put a stranglehold on its financial and terrorism operations. But it chose not to do so. Israel has been drawn into this fight. The Jewish state is on the front line of the war on terror. And as the Wall Street Journal editor-at-large Gerard Baker writes today in an excellent piece, the world should be thanking Israel. He says instead of constant calls for a ceasefire, the only appropriate response to Israel's fortitude and skill from its nominal allies should be thank you. And how can we help? He writes instead, time and time again, Israel's supposed friends, including the administration of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, have, while expressing sympathy over the outrage of October 7 and uttering the usual support for Israel's right to defend itself, repeatedly tried to restrain it from doing just that. Do they not get that in the end we have to make a choice? Our ally on the front lines of defence against barbarism, or our enemies, those who literally want to see us all buried? And if Gerard Bacon knew about Penny Wong and Albanese, he'd add them to the list of supposed friends too, because they've been worse than even the Biden administration, which at least voted against the pro-Hamas United Nations resolution. The line we constantly hear from the international community is that Israel has a right to defend itself, but. Every excuse under the sun for why Israel shouldn't fight back, for why Israel should just lay down arms and let the terrorists live and thrive and kill its own people. Well, Israel is not going to do that. No matter how many times the likes of Katie Gallagher and Penny Wong or Kamala Harris or Emmanuel Macron lecture Israel, it won't matter. Because Israel won't ask others for permission to survive. As Golda Meir said, Israel won't have its fate decided by others.